Question number 2, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
This question is to the Prime Minister and asks, does he stand by all his statements?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question.
Yeah, really,
Right
it is
Honourable
funny.
Winston Peters.
Does he stand by his statement to the House last week that, and I quote him, the rail line north of Whangarei is not closing? End of quotes.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, yes.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
If that's the case, Prime Minister, then why did Peter Reedy, Chief Exec of Kiwi Rail, state to the Transport Industrial Relations Committee on 2nd February this year that, and I quote him, well, at this stage, there is no rail north of Whangarei, end of quotes?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, well, because as we traversed last week, the issue isn't about the rail line closing, it's about whether an operator is operating on the line.
Order. Supplementary question. Order.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
How can he stand by that statement when the New Zealand Transports Agency Regional Director for Auckland and Northland, Ernst Zollner, talks of only roading projects in the far north without any funding and no funding for rail in the north of Kauri?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, the issue is whether there are customers who want to use the rail and actually pay the commercial rates for that. Last week, actually, funnily enough, I went to a function where one of the companies that's quite heavily involved in the far north said to me that they had considered the option of rail, but it was inefficient for their business and they were sticking with trucks.
Supplementary question. Right Honourable Winston Peters.
How can he and his Minister of Transport consistently tell this House one thing with respect, for example, the Portland line and the line north of Kauri, when the Chief Exec of Kiwi Rail and the NZTA Regional Manager for Auckland and Northland have both confirmed, to use their own words, in the parliamentary record for the Select Committee, quotes that there is no rail north of Kauri?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, because we're correct, in the same way that that member tells his caucus he loves them and knows who they are, but couldn't probably answer who their names are.
Order. Point of order. 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 I can only think there's some members to my right hand having trouble hearing me today, but if it continues, I won't hesitate to be asking ministers to leave.
Point of order,
the Right Honourable.
My point of order is about the good order of Parliament. Now, Speaker, surely the advice to the Prime Minister should be for him to apologise and withdraw those unseemly comments, or just fly a white flag when you're losing.
Order. 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 On this occasion, the answer was not helpful to the order of the House, but I hardly think it was of a context or tone that requires anything to be withdrawn. I think the member often gives as good as he gets. Does he have further subs? No. Question.